Week 34, Overview. The United States Constitution, its inception. This week we get to study how one of history's most influential documents was written. The United States Constitution is the oldest surviving written constitution on the planet. It isn't America's first constitution. It replaced the Articles of Confederation, which were drafted in 1777 and ratified in 1781. But 6 years later, it was increasingly obvious that the Articles of Confederation were not an adequate basis for union. During the long, hot summer of 1787, a group of 55 leaders from 12 of the 13 states met for hours each day in closed sessions in Philadelphia at the Constitutional Convention. These delegates knew that America was in trouble. The Articles of Confederation had created an imperfect union that could not effectively operate. After Shays' Rebellion was repressed, most state leaders recognized the need for serious amendments to the Articles and were ready to give up some of their state's powers to do so. A few leaders went further. They felt the Articles needed to be scrapped altogether. These men were the first to arrive in Philadelphia and began lobbying for their point of view. They soon persuaded the rest that a new constitution was needed. But what kind of constitution would that be? Thomas Jefferson was off in France, serving as America's ambassador. He knew many of the men who wrote the Constitution personally, and referred to the convention as an assembly of demigods. Despite Jefferson's high praise, they were all too human. They were proud men with strong convictions. These were men who had pledged their lives, their fortunes, and their sacred honor to fight Britain for a liberty they loved more than life. They were not the kind of men to compromise their principles. Given such men and such circumstances, the process that produced the new Constitution was well-nigh miraculous. Let's see how it came about. In 1786, representatives of 5 states convened at Annapolis, Maryland, to discuss improvements to the Articles of Confederation. In May 1787, representatives from every state but Rhode Island gathered in Philadelphia to draft amendments to the Articles of Confederation. The problem was, there was no way that mere amendments could fix what was wrong with the Articles. The original agreement between the states only worked when everybody already agreed, but you don't really need a government in that case. You need a government to make people do what they don't want to do, but that authority was exactly what the Articles of Confederation didn't provide. The delegates were supposed to gather by May 14th, but Philadelphia was a long way to travel back then. Before the convention started, a young delegate from Virginia named James Madison sat down with the other delegates from his state to propose what came to be known as the Virginia Plan. Madison suggested they change the basic form of representation in the United States. Under the Articles of Confederation, each state got 1 vote, regardless of their size. Under the Virginia Plan, representation would be based on population, which meant that big states would receive more votes than little ones. It wasn't until May 25th that delegates from enough states gathered to form a quorum. Rhode Island never did show up. The delegates met in the Pennsylvania State House, where they unanimously elected George Washington president of the convention. He sat in an ornate chair in the center of the room throughout the convention, saying very little, but maintaining a remarkable degree of order throughout that summer. Washington's prestige and credibility were absolutely essential to the success of the convention, so much so that he was called the indispensable man. After the preliminaries were over, the convention got down to business. Governor Edmund Randolph presented the Virginia Plan. New Jersey, a small state, asked for an adjournment to consider this proposal. The small states put together an alternate proposal known as the New Jersey Plan. It would keep the basic structure of the Articles of Confederation, especially the one-state, one-vote method of representation. The New Jersey Plan didn't pass, but it gave the small states something to rally around. Representation was a problem that would not go away. The big states argued that it was fundamentally unfair to deprive their citizens of an equal share of power. The small states refused to put themselves at the mercy of their larger neighbors. But representation wasn't the only sticking point. Slavery proved to be just as sticky. Slaves made up 40% of the Southern population. Were slaves people or property? Would the new Congress be able to regulate the slave trade? 10 states had already outlawed the slave trade. What if Congress did the same? Georgia and the 2 Carolinas threatened to leave the convention if the slave trade was banned. The delegates had to compromise on this issue. In the end, they counted slaves as 3/5 of a person, and gave Congress the power to ban the slave trade, but not for 20 more years. That was enough to satisfy the southern states. They figured that by then they would have enough slaves to not need more from Africa. The 3/5 compromise was one that most modern Americans are ashamed of. The Grand Compromise, by contrast, has been one of the great breakthroughs in political history. The Grand Compromise was originally Roger Sherman's idea, a delegate from Connecticut. He suggested a way the small states and the large states could each get what they wanted. Under his plan, Congress would have two houses. In the first, representation would be based on population. In the second, each state would get the same votes. We know a lot about the process of writing the Constitution because James Madison took notes all through the convention. We know even more about the reasoning behind the Constitution because of another of Madison's writing projects, the Federalist Papers. In an effort to persuade New York State to ratify the Constitution, James Madison, John Jay, and Alexander Hamilton collectively wrote a series of 85 essays that were published in newspapers. These are known as the Federalist Papers. Students in the government track will read 2 of these this week to better understand the choice the people were making in adopting their new Constitution. Federalist Number 10, by James Madison, discusses the problem of factionalism and its cure. Many of the previous republics in history were weakened or destroyed by internal strife. Madison argued that a large and well-constructed republic can prevent this problem. With enough diversity, competing interest groups should prevent any one faction from maintaining permanent majority control. Even if one special interest group dominates one region of the country, other groups in other places will counter its power. Federalist Number 51 explains the secret of the Constitution's success, pitting ambition against ambition to protect the people. By dividing the government into 3 separate branches with the ability to protect their own independence, the Constitution harnesses human self-interest to keep political power in check. This does not reflect well on human nature, but neither does the need for human government in the first place. If men were angels, no government would be necessary. Dividing the powers of government ran counter to the latest thinking in Europe. History had taught Great Britain to check the power of the king, but as we've noticed in past weeks, lawyers like William Blackstone and politicians like William Pitt believed the solution was to give unchecked power to Parliament. French philosophes like Jean-Jacques Rousseau believed the shortest path to freedom was to give absolute power to the people. America's absolute rejection of absolute power may hurt human pride, but it helps human beings. Limiting government power has increased human freedom. The Constitution was signed by all the states, but not all the men who helped write the Constitution signed it. The governor of Virginia, Edmund Randolph, was one of the prime movers, but he refused to sign the document. George Mason, author of Virginia's Bill of Rights, refused to sign as well. Patrick Henry refused to even go to the convention. As we will see next week, he did his best to keep the Constitution from being ratified. But these opponents were in the minority. Benjamin Franklin summed up the sentiments of the signers. He said, "There are several parts of this Constitution which I do not at present approve, but I am not sure I shall never approve them. I doubt whether any other convention we can obtain may be able to make a better Constitution. It therefore astonishes me, sir, to find this system approaching so near to perfection as it does, and I think it will astonish our enemies." More than 2 centuries later, the United States Constitution continues to confound America's enemies and delight the friends of freedom.